One of the things which the UPA did and which has been building up over the years is a lot of sort of programs, redistributive programs, if you want to call them, sort of programs directed at the poor. So, two of the major schemes of the UPA, the NREGA and the food subsidy programs would fall in that category. And there's a pervasive sense from, a wide sort of people coming at it from various angles, that the delivery mechanisms have been really broken, that it's all a mess. There's a huge number of complex schemes. There's massive leakages, massive corruption, massive inclusion and exclusion errors, and so on and so forth. So we need to clean it up, even if one kind of agrees with the principle of underlying these programs. We need more clean and efficient ways of redistributing money and having poverty removal programs. So we have seen some movements in that direction. The direct benefit transfer scheme, which has been brought in for LPG. There's been a push towards financial inclusion, the Jan Dhan Yojana, which has to be an integral component of it. And there's a general movement towards cash transfers, which to many people are the solution. Pranabdha has recently written about the idea of having something like universal basic income in the context of India. It has been talked about for Western countries. In the context of India, Abhijit Banerjee goes further than Pranabdha and says that let's get rid of these complex, leaky schemes and let's replace them by something clean, like universal basic income. So looking at it overall, two questions. How do you see the government approaching this? Are they headed in the right direction? And normatively speaking, what are the things we should do? What are the things they should do? Pranabdha.
Yes, in the social sector, I would say the government is continuing with some of the UPA programs. Even the Jan Dhan, which is a signature program of this government, if you think about around 2009, when the UPA government decided to transfer many of the NREGA payments through bank accounts, suddenly there was a huge number of bank accounts created. But of course, in the Jan Dhan, it has gone much further. But it is a continuation of those programs. Similarly, the signature sanitation campaign of Swachh Bharat is a continuation of the UPA Nirmal Bharat. But what I think the government should do in the Swachh Bharat is, why is it that millions of toilets built in the Nirmal Bharat, almost half have not been used? Why? One try to understand that. There are different explanations about water supply, explanations of who will clean those toilets. Hindu cultural taboos will not allow many people to clean those toilets, and so on. So I think without examining why those programs did not work, to continue with another million of toilets, I'm not thinking it's the right way to go, but it's in the right direction. The social sector's programs are in the right direction. Similarly, NREGA, a program which Mr. Modi called a sign of monumental failure, now BJP government is taking credit for that program. It's heartening to see. So I would say direction, yes, but leakages, on leakages issue, I think over time things are improving. There's still huge amount of leakages, but all the evidence that I see, it started in the earlier period and even now, over time leakages are going down, even though they're still substantial, particularly in NREGA. Even in the food security program, I'm less of an enthusiast of the public distribution system, but compared to the NREGA, but even there, I understand the leakages are going down. You also asked the question about basic income. I don't want to spend too much time on it because I have written on it. If anyone is interested, in fact, Ideas for India brought out is going to bring out some. So let me just say, if those of you are not familiar with basic income, This is an idea that's been around for 200 years at least in the West. I, along with others, feel that it's probably more applicable to poor countries than in rich countries, because we can afford it to a large extent. How do you afford it? The way I'm thinking of it, if politically we have the courage to cut down on some of the regressive subsidies, subsidies which at the moment go to the richer people and the middle class people in India, then it is possible to fund a fairly significant amount of basic income, which means everybody, rich or poor, are going to get a certain amount of income. In the scheme that I've given is that, suppose, just back of the envelope calculation, suppose everybody, in each citizen of India is given rupees 10,000 every year. That means if you have a family of 4, 40,000. It is significant basic income. Even that large amount is financially feasible if India has the political courage to cut down on some of the subsidies to the better off people. And of course, politically it will be quite difficult, but all I'm saying is possible. If anyone is interested in the question answer period, I'd be happy to answer questions about basic income. I don't think it's a panacea, and I don't think it should replace some of the other programs in health, education, and NREGA. I don't think they should be replaced by basic income, but some highly dysfunctional programs, and also as it is normatively, I think it's a desirable, not scheme, but also financially feasible. Whether it's politically feasible or not, I think it is politically feasible. At least some steps can be taken toward it, but if necessary, I can come back to it.
A complicated subject. Much has been said that I agree with. I think I'll just put out something which I think we need to think about, and it's a generalization of a point Pranadda just made, which is, so we talk a lot about the social sector, and I think one of the signal failures of Indian policy discussion has been, we understand market failures, some of them at least. We understand some of the state failures. We actually don't understand social failures. And the incredible cost to social policy of those social failures, right? So, pardon the language, but a country in which you think the state needs to teach people how to shit and dispose of their garbage, it's not clear that that's just an engineering problem. Engineering can help. It's not clear that it's just policy intervention, right? And I think the good thing about Mr. Modi when he started was that he put it on the political agenda in a way that had not been done. And I think with the kind of conviction that, I mean, you know, has to do with the complicated sociology of India. But I don't think there has been a follow-up on that discussion of social failure. Because, I mean, essentially what are we saying, right? I mean, in the sense that effectively the state has to bear costs of a lot of things which it would not have to if the nature of our social relationships were different, right? And I think that capacity in Indian society and that capacity to mediate conflict around those kinds of social relationships, to my mind, is actually going to be the single most important question of the next whatever. I mean, it has been for a long time, right? And I think that's a question we need some analytical handle on. I mean, I think the state is doing what it does because that's what we know how to measure, that's what we know how to talk about, go build toilets, go build whatever, right? But what is the social structure and set of social relationships in which that is embedded? I think if you're honest with ourselves, I think that needs to be a much more self-conscious political question. I'm not sure what agencies will do it, what kind of social movements in other contexts have addressed that question of social failure. But I think it is a question that needs to be put on the agenda. I mean, the schemes and stuff, it'll probably take too long to go through many of them, so I'll skip that part.
Before I pass it on to me, let me ask a quick follow-up question specifically to you, Pradhan. As you mentioned, this social failure, right? And clearly some of the problems that we have talked about and some the government has focused on. So to give two specific examples, one is this open defecation issue, and the other is the gender issue, right? Our skewed gender ratio, the massive problems that we have. So they're clearly, a big part of the problem is the social failure. And shouldn't we give the government and this Prime Minister in particular some credit on that front? Because our paradigm has been, the statist and this market sort of, there has been some sort of didactic effort, if you will. The speech from the Red Fort where he talked about look after your boys, what they're doing, and so on. So isn't there a change on that front?
I would argue, I mean, look, the data on this stuff takes a long while to come, right? So we don't, I mean, certainly there's been more didactic, and it's been more than didactic effect. I mean, I think the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, from what we can gather from interim surveys, is having some effect in some states. Whether it's robust enough to be confident that we've really finally decisively turned a corner on that, I'm actually not sure. The gender issue which you mentioned, which look, I mean, I think one of my colleagues is fond of saying that the one way of thinking about the India-China comparison is actually on the gender dimension, right? Which is per capita, per worker capita, actually the difference between Indian economy and Chinese economy is actually much less than what the aggregate number actually seems, right? It's 1.5 as opposed to 5, right? And the long and short of that story is we have some of the lowest female participation rates in the country. Now, again, there's a complicated social dynamic. At some point, the curve tips. But the worrying part, right, and this is a social question, which is at the top end of the pyramid, right? So enrollments in higher education are actually touching close to 50%, right? I mean, that is a big social revolution in the making, right? But even in that segment, labor force participation is still very, very low. In fact, when people say, where are India's best workers, why aren't they coming onto the market? Probably there's your answer right there, right? In terms of a certain talent pool. Now, the kind of very supple, so obviously you need state intervention, right? I mean, obviously you need childcare support systems. You need a whole range of supple institutional interventions that make that participation possible, right? But I think, I mean, I think it's interesting that that kind of conversation is still very much off the kind of political and social radar. I mean, even companies are not having it to the extent that they actually, in a sense, need to. And that's going to be probably the single most important axis around which then a lot of these other things, or even growth, actually get structured.
Well, I think that one of the best areas in which this government has done best actually is in the social sector, not in social policy, but in the social sector, with some exceptions. We'll get to the exceptions in a second. But otherwise, I think that they have correctly figured out that we're not, you started by saying, weren't we going to be moving from, a welfarist kind of thinking about the world to a more market? We haven't, and in this respect, this is a very good thing, right? They have kept going with what has been the broad thrust of Indian political thought for a very long time, which is that, yes, we are going to be a welfare state long before we can afford it, and somehow we will make it work, all right? And they have started working on how to make it work, and I think they've done better on it than a lot of previous governments. They've built on a lot of things. They've got technological interventions that are happening at just the right minute as well, but it's excellent. The exception is health, which I think Professor Bardhan has already talked about, so we won't go there, but he's exactly right. You cannot replace a universal health care with the kind of private insurance-based thing that I can confirm is what they're likely to put in. But I just want to come back to the Swachh Bharat thing as an example. And I think that the reason that it has caught our imaginations is not just because the Prime Minister did a very good job of selling it, but because, as he himself pointed out, it was unusual for the Prime Minister to stand up and make a big deal out of cleaning our streets or cleaning our neighborhoods and ensuring that sanitation worked, but also because this is, I think, something that we all as a country recognize that we are not very good at, and we hate it when anyone tells us that. Right? So it's nice that we can finally have an actual grown-up discussion, not somebody coming from outside and saying, holding their nose and saying it smells awful, but actually, or somebody at an uncle at a dinner table saying, we throw things outside, but actually to have somebody in authority saying there is something wrong with how we handle our streets, and it's important for us to start talking about it. And I think that that was a wonderful thing that the PM did. My sole point is you need to, and a lot of people started actually doing that kind of thing, right? They would go out spend their weekends, or well, not their weekends, but 1 or 2 weekends, try to clean up their neighborhoods. You need to be able to follow that up with some kind of civic institution building, local government institution building that supports the change in behavior, right? So if you want to educate people about using toilets, then you build the toilets, right? And so there you've built the toilets, you may not be educating people about it. You want to educate people about ensuring that they don't chuck garbage about, but you really haven't changed the structures of local government that would be responsive to the fact that people are now chucking garbage around less. And I think that if Swachh Bharat fails, and if, on its many dimensions, it's 2 dimensions basically, the 2 dimensions have been picked up from 2 previous UPA programs. If the 2-dimensional Swachh Bharat fails, it's because you haven't got both the behavioral and the institutional support happening at the same time. And that's what you really need to work on. That's